Welcome to Fix Your Gut, the live stream. My name is Jason Hooper, and we're here with John Brissom.
Hey everybody, we're back again.
Today we're going to be talking about upper gut infections and sort of how they arise and the damage that can do, and we're going to try to educate you on some possible treatment options that people use from time to time.
Sounds good. Today's going to be a big live stream. Been coaching more and more people with upper gut infections and the problems that they cause. And it's weird because, with upper gut infections are a little bit different than what you see with SIBO or with, dysbiosis of the colon, or they call large intestine bacterial overgrowth. Upper gut infections tend to be a little bit more scarier in a lot of their symptoms because you get less of the digestive symptoms to a degree and more of the systemic symptoms. And in a lot of people, depending on the progression or the certain organism, like H. pylori, for example, can work its way itself into the brain and cause a lot of problems. But we'll talk more about H. pylori later.
So what's going to be the scope of this? Are we going to talk about viral infections also and thrush and whatever, or are we just going to primarily focus on bacteria?
Just primarily focus on bacteria, at least for now. If you want to throw in thrush and like candida and stuff like that, we can. And, viral infections, usually of the gastrointestinal variety, usually don't stick around and cause too many issues. It's usually the co-infections that go along with it that affect nerves and stuff like that, or varicella colonizing the upper esophageal sphincter. But I think we should just mainly focus on bacteria because there's not a lot of information out there about it, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about that. I think we should stick mainly with bacteria, at least for now.
So if somebody were to have an upper gut infection, what symptoms would probably present more than likely, and what would get them starting to research or starting to seek medical care from their medical provider? Like what's the thing that's really going to make them say, this isn't right, I need to do something about this?
Well, it depends on the stage of the upper gut infection, and it depends on what strain and what issue that they're suffering from. But generally, most people present themselves with inflammation of the stomach or the esophagus, even, like GERD-like symptoms, gastritis-like symptoms, ulcers, but not always. I mean, it can go from just that to eventually starting to affect the nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, leading to like Röhm-Helm syndrome type side effects, also known as gastrocardia type side effects, where, when a person has a lot of gas or a lot of pressure on their vagus nerve from an upper gut infection, they start developing like super fast heart rate, even AFib in some cases, or chronic heart disease and stuff like that. Paradoxical symptoms that you would associate with, like intestinal infection. But you do see that with upper gut infections that can even later affect the vagus nerve, and even eventually, depending on the microbe, affect the brain. But generally, when people first present themselves to their healthcare professional, it's just standard upper gut inflammation, GERD side effects, maybe silent reflux side effects, maybe bile reflux side effects, generally some sort of reflux and some sort of gastritis.
Okay. I think it's interesting. You hit on a couple things, but I think that to me, some of the behavioral side effects that result from infection, I think are fascinating. You touched on TRPV 1 and 2 activation. These somehow, over the course of natural selection, bacteria have evolved to be able to upregulate these neural pathways to increase. Well, one of the resulting effects is to increase heart rate. And some people probably have heard of like these rat studies that have been coming out with toxoplasmosis, where like these rats are, you know, they're getting infected with bacteria that are making them like attracted to cat pee.
You mean parasites?
Right, right.
Toxoplasmosis would be a parasite, but yeah, you're correct. It drives them to the cats.
It's the I guess it's the fleas, right, on the rats. But yeah, they basically, they're saying like, oh, are they committing suicide or what's going on? Which I think is fascinating too. So from a genetic advantage, what is the advantage of upregulating TRVP1 and 2? Like, why would that organism do that? Like, would it have a benefit to just raising your heart rate, or what's going on there?
I mean, we know with H. pylori, for example, it's able to regulate many different neurotransmitters, you know, to increase its survival, acetylcholine, noradrenaline, adrenaline, dopamine. It's able to modulate these neurotransmitters for survival. It's able to modulate more digestion, things like leptin and ghrelin and stuff like that, and you know, pepsin release and somatostatin and stuff like that, and even CCK. It's just able. That's the thing about H. pylori, which a lot of people don't realize is H. pylori evolved just like Toxoplasmosis gondii evolved as a parasite. It evolved to have us as its primary host. The problem with T. gondii is that we're not like rats or cats, where you know we don't spread it as easily, especially anymore in a post-industrial world, or current industrial world, should I say. We don't, you know, we dispose of our waste, we flush it down the toilet. It's not, you know, we're end hosts for T. gondii, so pretty much it just, you know, it stays in the body, it ends up in the brain, and eventually, you know, 15 or 20 years down the line, it reactivates itself in the brain and causes severe inflammation and causes, well, I believe to be schizophrenia and maybe rage impulse disorders, and stuff like that. So it's the same with H. pylori, in that H. pylori, when we get it, it colonizes the mouth, and it can cause like burning mouth syndrome, or you know, real bad halitosis or gum disease, or you know, periodontal disease. It's able to move up into the eyes, and is able to cause the autoimmune disorder known as Sjögren's syndrome. And then it's able to go down the esophagus, get into our stomach, and colonize the stomach and the duodenum, depending on different factors, you know, like our own immune system, or when we get it, our own stomach acid production depends on where it colonizes. And then from there, if we're lucky, quote unquote, it can move on to the vagus nerve, and then from there, it's a hop, skip, and away to our brain. And it seems that H. pylori colonization of the brain causes similar symptoms to T. gondii. You know, it causes, you know, huge impulse rage, you know, issues and disorders and stuff like that, and anxiety and everything. And I mean, we're not 100% sure that it's able to colonize the brain. It could be just endotoxins and inflammation from leaky gut, or, you know, regulation of all these neurotransmitters from affecting the vagus nerve. We're not 100% sure yet. Its capabilities to infect the brain like T. gondii is able to, but it does appear that H. pylori is able to cause a lot of those problems, you know, even causing a lot of mental disorders, similar to T. gondii. You know, and it's either the inflammation that comes from having H. pylori, or the H. pylori itself. Either way, it's scary. It's scary that this one bacteria is capable of, you know, controlling, you know, what foods that you eat, you know, influencing your cravings for its survival, or influencing when you eat, you know, and stuff like that, so that it's able to further proliferate. It's able to control, you know, your autonomic nervous system. It's scary. It's scary of what all it can control.
Yeah. I think though that like from an anthropomorphic point of view, like we try to empathize with the microorganism and think that this is by intelligent design, like the organism is like it was its plan all along to be able to get us to eat certain things, or you know, to upregulate the vagus nerve and overstimulate the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. But really, I think that just by upregulating you know, TPVRN 1 and 2, like I think that has to do with like it increases gastric emptying, and so that's going to raise the pH of the upper gut, and it's going to be able to thrive more. It also increases body temperature, which is, you know, it's going to thrive more in higher body temperature. It's going to like the feeling like you're stressed is going to lead to more air swallowing, and it needs, you know, it does better in an aerobic environment than the anaerobic environment. So the air swallowing helps it out. So it's not like these guys just got together, you know, all these H. pylori bugs got together sitting around a campfire and they're like, all right, so we're gonna make this guy eat a lot of sugar, you know, so that we can be well fed. We're gonna make him stressed out, you know, we're gonna make him do all this. It's just like I guess the endotoxins that it releases lead to this, and the ones that were excreting these endotoxins got stronger, and the ones that didn't died away. And so
I mean, yeah, but there are still H. pylori, like what they call SIGA A+, which seems to be probiotic H. pylori instead of opportunistic H. pylori. And also depending on when you got infected, like let's say when you were a child compared to if you were an adult with it, also makes a difference of whether or not it's friend or foe. Don't get me wrong, H. pylori, the studies have shown, you know, under the right conditions and under the right strains, can be very beneficial for your digestive health. The problem is, in this modern world, we have such overwhelmed immune systems, and from our environment and you know, from lack of vitamin D and, you know, the poor diet and other factors and stuff like that. Because of that, you know, we either get inoculated with, you know, more opportunistic strains, or even the strains that are less opportunistic seem to be able to run amok, you know, because of those issues.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that has to do with horizontal gene transfer. And when we just say like H. pylori, there could be there's so many different variants of that microorganism. And you know, when we start talking about treatment resistance and the different types of biofilms that they have, and you know, the way basically the way that they can create a matrix from which they can dwell and hide from you know, from compounds that would kill them otherwise. You know, from one, even though they're the same species, from one to the next, there's quite a bit of variance. And so I just want to talk a little bit about horizontal gene transfer. And horizontal gene transfer is how bacteria, even unrelated bacteria, can transfer genetic material from one to another. And it has been studied with H. pylori. There are studies out there showing horizontal gene transfer. And basically, if a bacterium gets lysed, or basically, you know, you've got the bacteria gets lysed, so it, like, you know, its cell membrane rips apart or whatever. It's just all the stuff just kind of floats out. Well, another bacterium could eat it and then take that genetic information, just plug it right in. And some of these genes, you know, are endotoxin producing genes. Some of them are biofilm producing genes. And sometimes they pick up genetic material from pathogenic bacteria, and then they turn into pathogens themselves. And so you can have healthy levels of H. pylori, and there's, you know, you can have, I guess, the probiotic H. pylori that don't have, that they're not toxin producing. And then they could be introduced to toxin producing plasmids, and they could eat them, and all of a sudden they've got those genes, and then they become the bad guys. So
yeah, I mean, definitely that is possible. It seems the CAG plus strain of the H. pylori seems to be rather beneficial. And it is able to excrete some endotoxins, of course, being gram-negative, just through, shedding of the standard lipid layer. But you are correct that it seems to be less virulent in its capabilities. But that being said, H. pylori is it's able to do so much to avoid detection by our immune system. It's able to modulate inflammatory pathways, manipulate like you talked about earlier with the capsaicin, TRPV, receptors and stuff like that. And the same with it's able to modulate a TNF, tumor necrosis factor pathways, and it's able to, use endotoxins and flagellin to avoid immune system, produce biofilms, reduce nitrous oxide production. I mean, it's able to do a lot to avoid detection. That's why it's so hard for people to get positive H. pylori tests unless the overgrowth is so strong, that they could show up as far as like a urea breath test where it has to be predominantly in the stomach for it to test positive. Or even, I've heard the theories of glucose hydrogen testing for SIBO becoming positive due to the H. pylori being able to, use the glucose to produce more hydrogen, because H. pylori is a hydrogen producing bacteria. So, it's hard, especially when people go get biopsies of their stomach done, when they have endoscopies, or endoscopes. It's weird how, unless they biopsy the exact place or go deep enough to where the H. pylori itself is, you can have a biopsy done 2 or 3 times and they come back negative, and the 4th time they happen to get exactly right where the H. pylori is. And, if it's not living in your stomach at the time, let's say it's living in your mouth, or it's already moved to your vagus nerve or even your brain, the biopsies that you're having in the stomach, they're all going to come back negative. Doesn't necessarily mean you don't have the bacteria. You know what I mean? It seems like, Jason, that current testing methods that we have for H. pylori are just are not great. I mean, I've seen possibility of, biotoxin like antigen tests and stuff like that might be a little bit better in determining if one has an overgrowth of H. pylori or not.
Yeah.
But even then, they're not perfect.
Yeah. My issue with the antigen tests, I guess this is my opinion, is that I think that a lot of the antigen tests for anything, whether you're looking for SIBO or H. pylori or quote unquote food allergies or food sensitivities, I think a lot of these tests are really just detecting leaky gut, and that you've got some kind of membrane permeability, your mucosal barrier is compromised, and you're getting some IgG, IgA markers to light up because of that. But is it actually because of the microorganisms, or the microorganisms causing the leaky gut? I mean, it is a test that could show you something, but it's by far from being a silver bullet.
I agree. There's no current silver bullet testing for most overgrowth, whether it be SIBO or breath testing. There's been a lot of cast of doubt on it lately and stuff like that, which we could talk about that later on another live stream when we revisit SIBO yet again. It seems like the testing methods that we have now aren't the best in the world. I mean, not even the gold standard, like I said, of biopsies, with biopsy issues as far as contamination, from having to go the oral route down and to the stomach to be able to get a biopsy and stuff like that. It's not perfect. So pretty much it comes down to what do we do? Do we try to tackle and try to help people who come to us with conditions that appear to be upper gut overgrowths, and see if they react to using certain supplements that are localized, to specific areas. Like if you think you have a colonization of H. pylori, so you think a person has burning mouth syndrome, maybe using some oral colloidal silver or oral oil pulling using coconut oil or extra virgin olive oil to see if that makes a difference. so that you wouldn't affect the rest of the microbiome. It's always a possibility to try it that way. But it seems to me that, with a lot of people that, I'm coaching and I'm seeing that, have negative H. pylori test results, but have all the symptoms, when I recommend them to try certain things or put them on certain protocols, their symptoms improve. So it has to be some sort of upper gut overgrowth, right? Of some sort, or overgrowth of some sort, if they're reacting positively to localized antimicrobial agents.
Yeah. I mean, the outcome, you can't really ignore the outcome. If it like whatever was wrong with them, if the treatment produced the outcome that the client wants, then that's what's important. So let's say it was, just hypothetically, let's say it wasn't an upper gut infection. Well, they're better off than they were before you gave them that treatment. And a lot of these supplements are, it's not like these supplements have like huge side effects or anything, or even remotely dangerous at all.
Correct. Some of them have more issues. Like I used to recommend oil of oregano, but now since cavarosol and thymol have systemic microbiome effects, I only use it as a third wave agent now instead of a first wave agent. I try to do the most localized as possible at first, like using D-limonene and zinc carnosine to try to help with upper gut infections before I move on to other stuff like oil of oregano or N-acetylcysteine, like for biofilm, for example. N-acetylcysteine is also a systemic agent. So the older I've gotten, the wiser I've got. I think it's better to try to localize as much as you can without affecting, systemic, microbiome, like the skin, the nose, women, the vagina, all those can be, changed through using systemic agents, and could negatively affect them. If anybody ever tells you that, most of the supplements that we have, none of them affect probiotic bacteria, I hate to tell them, the person, and I'll tell them mostly to their face unless they prove to me otherwise, they're lying.
Who says that?
There's a lot of people on the internet that'll say, well, oil of oregano doesn't affect probiotic bacteria, or the sulfur from garlic doesn't affect probiotic, or allicin doesn't. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but no. It does. It all has the same effect, which is these phytochemicals, for example, like oil of oregano, cavarosol or thymol, causing oxidative stress on anything it comes in contact with. It's the same with silver. It's just silly how people look at it that way.
Yeah. Well, you should, if you haven't seen it, you could go back and check out that interview that I did with Dr. Andrew Weiss, and he has since come up with a line of products that use natural terpenes as antimicrobials, and
they're safer. Don't get me wrong, but they can still reduce probiotic bacteria over time.
Well, yeah, but basically what he says in this interview is that these terpenes are nature's solution.
Correct.
To deal with bacteria. So, he says like peppermint grows in just about every corner of the earth, and it produces that peppermint oil that's such a strong
menthol.
Menthol is just a really strong antimicrobial. A thymol is incredibly powerful.
Thymol's very powerful, very powerful.
I have in an eyedropper some concentrated thymol or thymol, and if you drop it, like if you just take a drop and put it on your tongue, it burns like crazy. So it's it's not just toxic to bacteria, but like it will kill your cells too.
Yes.
But so like, what are these like magic probiotic bacteria that like are somehow able to survive it, but like nothing, it creates lots of oxidative stress, and it kills pretty much any cell it comes in contact with.
I'm just saying that's what they claim, that antimicrobial agents are able to distinguish, oxidative stress, and it's all the same. Now, is there a difference between using oil of oregano or ciprofloxacin? I'm pretty sure the use of oil of oregano is safer. but don't quote me on that. But I would assume, you know, it's like picking your poison. You know, it's what it is. It's all doing oxidative stress to our cells, to our probiotic bacteria, you know, to the opportunistic bacteria. You just hope that you do enough stress to the opportunistic bacteria so that, you know, pretty much the microbiome shift occurs in a positive light, and you get better. It's all a gamble.
Yeah. It is. You can manipulate the environment, and
Correct.
But I mean, I just want to go back to this one thing. It seems to me like the quote unquote probiotic bacteria seems to be the most susceptible. They tend to die first before some of the pathogenic bacteria die.
H. pylori has different ways to survive. Bifidobacterium, not so much.
So basically, like, you can use different release points, and you can take different supplements that are going to affect a certain point in the digestive tract. So if you have an upper gut infection and you take D-limonene, which is a terpene that comes from like orange peels, for instance, citrus, and it floats on top of the bile in the stomach. So if you do have reflux, it will coat all this area on the way up and kind of protect it. And it, you know, it stays on the top, so it's less likely, and I'm not saying it won't affect anything as it's being digested, but it tends to break down before it hits. Basically, it tends to break down before it even leaves the stomach. So
correct. In the most part, it does, and it does protect the esophageal tissue based off of studies from free radical damage and inflammation that can occur from stomach acid and from endotoxins and stuff like that, or you know, opportunistic bacteria themselves. Whatever damage, it can protect the esophagus and the lower esophageal sphincter too, at least the cardia, from damage and reducing inflammation. D-limonene seems to be a very, very, very underrated supplement that's extraordinarily cheap for upper gut health.
yeah, I mean, I take D-limonene every other day. I basically take D-limonene on workout days. If I'm doing like heavy squats or deadlifts, you know, when I have that much weight on my back and I hold my breath and I'm just pushing up, it generates a lot of pressure on my abdominal cavity, right? And so a lot of powerlifters and weightlifters and athletes that do this kind of stuff, they will get some reflux, you know, because all the stomach acid will start coming up. So I take it an hour before my workout, and it coats, it coats my my esophagus, and it feels good that way. When I get some reflux, it doesn't burn, it doesn't hurt. And I used to get like sore throats and stuff if I'd lift really heavy. After, I'd do it for a long period of time, like in the periodization of my workout routine. If I was just working on strength with really high reps and really low volume, then I would get a lot of sore throats, and I didn't put two and two together for a long time. And I was like, man, I always tend to get sick. Maybe this is trashing my immune system, but it's really just from the reflux. So I started taking it, never had that problem since. It also tends to do a number on H. pylori.
Yep.
If they're not in their biofilm matrix that protects them from the D-limonene and they're exposed to it, it pretty much kills them on contact.
Yep. Yes, it does. Same with Citrobacter and same with Protus mirabilis, which are other upper gut microorganisms. That's the problem with upper gut infections, and the reason why I haven't wrote about them other than H. pylori and extend on Fix Your Gut, which I will in the future, is there's just not a lot of information. There's not a lot of studies. There's not a lot of anything.
Yeah, and when I was researching all of these, like the research gets them confused, and they didn't really, and there was a lot of conflation between the different species, like Campylobacter, and then H. pylori. They didn't distinguish that between Campylobacter.
Originally, they did, and they thought H. pylori was just another Campylobacter strain.
Yeah, and for like until like the 80s, right?
Yeah,
and that's when they finally, like 86 is when they figured it out. Which, I mean, if you think about it, it's fairly recent, and then up until that point, it starts being known as the Campylobacteria-like organism until like the 90s. But then it's not like everybody caught on to it right away. And all the
doctors didn't treat until the early 2000s.
Yeah, they didn't get together and be like, all right, this is what this thing is called and this is what it does or whatever. Like, they still write articles today about Campylobacter, and they're really referring to H. pylori and vice versa. And so it gets confusing. Yeah, when you're doing meta research and you're using a good search engine, searching for information, looking at articles, and you're just whatever, which is probably not the best way to research. But if you're hitting key terms and stuff, lots of different crazy stuff can come up, and you really have to figure out who wrote it, where they wrote it, and then you got to look at the other articles they wrote to make sure they're consistent with what they're talking about, with the terminology that they're using. So that's a huge problem with the research, and that's probably why we're so far behind in the mainstream medical community for diagnosis and treatment, because you're not going to get a diagnosis for something that you don't know about. And you're not going to get a treatment for something that you don't know about.
It's like the third type of SIBO, which is also known as hydrogen sulfide, which I have not wrote a lot about because I can't find any information. I know it exists because I've had clients I've had to deal with. I've had to deal with hydrogen sulfide upper gut infections, which are like Proteus mirabilis, for example, which they test positive for on a GIFX stool culture. And sure enough, they have symptoms of hydrogen sulfide overgrowth, severe brain fog, especially when they eat high thiol foods like eggs, broccoli, cabbage, garlic and onions and stuff like that. Gives a massive brain fog from the hydrogen sulfide leaking out of their gut, and headaches and stuff like that. So I know that they have hydrogen sulfide overgrowth, even some upper gut, some in the small intestine, depending on the strain of bacteria. And bismuth is a godsend for most people with that, because when they take bismuth combines with the hydrogen sulfide and produces bismuth sulfate, which is harmless. It just turns your stool black and you defecate it out. The only problem with bismuth is you can't take it forever because it is a heavy metal and it does accumulate in the body. So it's only recommended for 2 to 3 weeks or a month. The good news is bismuth is eliminated by the body by glutathione. So it's one of the few heavy metals where it's pretty darn easy to get rid of. Compared to like mercury and stuff like that. But it's sad. People are going to their doctors with all these issues, and their doctors don't have no idea what's wrong with them.
Yeah, I think a lot of times they spot treat the symptoms. Like they'll say, especially people with peptic ulcers, they'll say like, oh, you got too much stomach acid. It's ripping holes through your stomach, and they give them medication. They give them PPIs, or they give them, or they say, oh, you're too stressed out. Well, instead of like saying, oh, you're stressed and therefore this is happening, they don't think of like, oh, the bacteria is causing the stress because it's stimulating the vagus nerve.
It's something. It's it's the H. pylori. There's so many studies out there that show that it's the cause of certain autoimmune conditions like burning mouth syndrome and Sjögren's syndrome and stuff like that. And the medical community just doesn't. We know that H. pylori is capable of colonizing, the eyes, the sinus cavity, and the mouth, not just the stomach. They want to focus on it. It stays in the stomach and the duodenum, and that's it. And it's not able to colonize any other place in the body. That's just untrue. It's untrue. And it's sad. It's sad where I had one client who had burning mouth for 2 years. And 1 to 2 weeks on, following a protocol to tackle H. pylori in her mouth, and it had reduced by 90%. That's what all the studies say it is. But no, burning mouth syndrome is an autoimmune condition and should be controlled using analgesics and pain medications and SSRI antidepressants and gabapentin.
Yeah, which if you look at the symptoms they're having, and you can logically see how each one of those medications you listed are going to it's like, okay, this is going to, proton pump inhibitors are going to reduce stomach acid, these anti-anxiety medications are going to calm you down. Gabapentin,
will stop the burning in your mouth by shutting off the nerve symptoms and reduce your anxiety. They keep giving you medications to treat the symptoms, but they never try to tackle what it is, which is H. pylori overgrowth.
Right. And then, you tell somebody, you're like, if you tell somebody like, hey, you ask them like, have you gotten tested? And they're like, no, I haven't. And then they go to their doctor, and their doctor says, yeah, I don't really think it's this. And then they perform a test, and sure enough, it comes back negative, because they either, they do a test and they don't get lucky and find it, or whatever, for whatever reason, it doesn't come up. And then they lose even more credibility when it comes to finding
it's frustrating.
A decent treatment.
It's so frustrating with upper gut bacteria. I mean, we know very little of the microbiome now. We want to think that we do, but we know very little, and we know more about the colonic microbiome makeup and more about, small intestine than we do the upper gut. Upper gut, we're so confused, like Jason was talking about earlier. It's going to be 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, hell, most people don't realize that Lactobacillus is primarily located in the stomach and the duodenum. I mean, it's I just don't understand it, Jason. It just makes me mad. It makes me mad because so many people with these autoimmune conditions, H. pylori causes a whole bunch, Klebsiella causes a whole bunch, with alkalizing spondylitis and rheumatoid arthritis and even pneumonia, which, at least doctors know that Klebsiella pneumonia causes bacterial pneumonia. At least they figured that one out, right? But you have all these issues caused by these overgrowths, and it's what logic was it ever that the body's own immune system would just decide to wake up one day and just start attacking itself? I mean, would it be more logical to believe that an infection or an overgrowth of some sort would trigger that response?
I mean, I think so. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I don't know. It's, I think, like, if you're a microbiologist, you're going to look more at the biome. If you're an immunologist, you're going to look more at autoimmune stuff. It's just sometimes that you have confirmation bias in your specific specialty. So you're going to see whatever you want to look for. So whatever lens you're looking at the data with, that's what you're going to see.
Yeah, but the microbiologists get no credence when it comes to the health profession. All the credence is given to the immunologists. That's the problem. That's the way we look at it now. I know in most people that have rheumatoid arthritis is because Klebsiella oxytosa or Klebsiella pneumonia is leaking out of their guts and colonizing their joints. I know in most people with lupus, they're having systemic staph infections that is modulating their immune system, modulating all of these immune factors and stuff like that, and increasing inflammation, all this stuff that an immunologist would see, changes into, interleukins and, TNF alpha and stuff like that, them saying that the body is doing it, and it's not. It's these infections, these overgrowths that are causing that manipulation. And to not treat it as such based off of the information and give people autoimmune drugs to just suppress their immune system instead of tackling the overgrowth, it's one of the few things that I think is paramount to being. It's criminal at its worst, and at its best, it's blind ignorance.
Yeah, but. I mean, the problem is, there are these gatekeepers, there are these people who are licensed and trained to treat, and it's unlawful for anybody else to offer any, sort of treatment option for whatever. Like on Fix Your Gut, we have to use our wording very carefully. We can say it supports the digestive system. We're allowed to talk about supporting the systems and stuff, but we can't say, this treats your illness, because then we cross over to the area of treating stuff no matter what the research says. But
I can't tell you take this oil of oregano, it will cure your Sjögren's syndrome. I can never say that.
Yeah, but then are these these gatekeepers, are they researching? Are they keeping up with stuff? Are they?
They're not. None of them are. Just like we'll take H. pylori, for example. H. pylori was originally called Campylobacter pylori. And it took, I think it was Barry Marshall, it took him to literally go, I'm going to infect myself with H. pylori. I'm going to drink this culture of H. pylori. And he drunk it. It caused him to have gastritis and massive ulcers. He had to do that upon himself to prove to the medical community that it was the cause of ulcers, because ulcers were always believed to be mostly caused by stress.
So why is it that the Japanese seem to be more advanced in that area? Because they were using Zinc Carnosine. In fact, that they were using that, and like doctors were prescribing Zinc Carnosine as a treatment for decades before we ever did it here in the United States. Why is that?
I don't know. It's just like saying, why is Germany ahead of us on hepatitis and the use of arlipoic acid, and and I can't use treatment because what they use over there, and the treatment of diabetes and peripheral neuropathy. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know.
Is it because of like our pharmaceutical industry being so strong?
I don't want to put a tinfoil hat and say that it could be that or anything. I really don't honestly have the answer to that. I don't. I mean, I'd like to say that everybody's for the common goal, and you have health researchers who just don't know any better, and the whole healthcare system just doesn't know any better, and it's just ignorance. But in some cases, I mean, what's it going to take? Barry Marshall had to give himself H. pylori by ingesting a sample, a petri dish of it, just to prove that this is the cause, when he had been researching it for 5 years prior to that.
So most people have, I guess, non-pathogenic H. pylori. I mean, there's an argument that could be made that H. pylori is normal flora.
Well, for at least 70% of people, it could be higher than that, but it's between 60 to 70% it is normal flora. That is correct.
And they don't seem to have any ill effects from it.
Yes, they seem to have positive effects, and it seems to be the strains that are not opportunistic. It seems to reduce their chances of developing asthma as a child. Their chances of developing GERD are lessened. Their chances of developing Barrett's esophagus are lessened. They seem to have a healthier microbiome with these less pathogenic or opportunistic versions of H. pylori. It seems to be the more diverse one's microbiome is, the less digestive issues that they have, and I'm a firm believer in that. So technically, if you do have these lesser virulent, or even possibly even virulent H. pylori, as long as it's kept in check by the immune system and the microbiome around it, Lactobacillus, if there is enough of it, is able to keep the pH of the stomach and the duodenum, with proper stomach acid production, would be able to keep H. pylori in check. That's the problem is once you have too much H. pylori and Lactobacillus compete with one another. So generally, if you see Lactobacillus low in a culture or non-existent in a culture, it could be a possibility that someone has upper gut overgrowth. The probiotic bacteria, like you mentioned earlier, they're generally the first to go. Lactobacillus, if overwhelmed by H. pylori, will definitely be eliminated. Non-pathogenic E. coli, it will also be eliminated. Just like Klebsiella in the large intestine or the small intestine, depending on where it colonizes, it will take out bifidobacteria. So it seems to be that that you're correct in that, and it's a sad way of looking at that. That's why I named my H. pylori series H. pylori Friend or Foe. And what it comes down to is just a state of one's digestive health and their environment and their genetics and their epigenetics and their diet. All that just plays a factor on whether or not it's there to help or it's there to harm. So
there's a lot of different things that you just said that I would like to go into more detail on. And the first one is, you mentioned that Lactobacillus and H. pylori sort of have an inverse relationship. On one's high, the other's low, and
Correct.
Could that be environmental? Could it be, because lactobacilli do better in lower gastric pH, so greater stomach acid, and then the H. pylori tend to do better in the higher stomach pH or the more alkaline stomach environment. So could it just be, could what we be observing isn't necessarily a battle between the two species, but just we're looking at the environmental state, or one of the, I guess, variables of the environmental state of the upper gut?
Yeah, it could be. That could be possible, yes. It could be that the reason why lactobacillus reduces itself, even though H. pylori does have ways of producing bactericides to eliminate lactobacillus, but you are correct that it could be that with the higher pH, the lactic acid bacteria are not as comfortable in their environment, and their populations and the colonies tend to decrease. Could be possible.
There was a protocol that I read about, I don't know, a long time ago, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, where you would take synthetic hydrogen chloride or hydrochloric acid capsules, the Benetine HCl caps, and you would just, like you'd start with like 1 cap with your evening meal, and then you'd take 2 and then 3, and basically you'd go up until like it would, like you would get reflux from it, and then you'd go up basically until the reflux would stop, and then you would hold at that dose, and then you'd run that for such a long time to where like the upper gut would just become extremely acidic, and then all of a sudden your problem would solve itself. And so like, could it just be that you're artificially manipulating the pH of your upper gut and just killing off the H. pylori, letting the lactobacilli increase in growth, and then
possible. I mean, I used to be, everybody in the natural health community would say BT and HCl would work, but I always thought it would be like a drop in a bucket, but we do have some tests, some actual good scientific studies that show that it does greatly lower the pH of the stomach. Hell, even Coca-Cola does. Because the reason why we know this is because the researchers wanted, because certain medications work better on an acidic environment, like fluorocortisone, for example, antifungal medications. So they wanted to see what would happen in people with proton pump inhibitors who would have decreased absorption of these drugs, if the supplementation of BT-HCl or even Coca-Cola could help decrease the pH of the stomach, and therefore increase absorption of these drugs. So we do know that BT-HCl works based off of that. So since it does, in theory, you're correct. But we also have to look at the harm that it can cause. If someone has a massive H. pylori overgrowth in their stomach, and they try to drastically increase stomach acid production or reduce the pH of their stomach, it can cause H. pylori to go in defensive mode and burrow itself into the gastric mucosa and cause severe inflammation. So, you have to be careful. It doesn't happen to everybody, but in some people with significant enough overgrowth, it can occur. And while we're on that topic too, when you reduce your pathogen load of H. pylori, whether it be through antibiotic use or, that's why they give people proton pump inhibitors in theory, other than to help with antibiotics to tackle H. pylori, to quote unquote help the healing of the ulcers, because it doesn't expose to gastric acid, but also in theory possibly might drive the H. pylori out by increasing the pH of the stomach, and so that the antibiotics can come in greater contact with the colonies. So, it's kind of depends on the person of whether or not you want to, at the time where you're trying to eliminate the H. pylori, increase stomach acid production or decrease the pH of the stomach because of those issues that I brought up. Does it make any sense to you at all, Jason?
Yeah, ulcers are trickier because
correct.
You're dealing with damage. to wherever the ulcer is. I mean, it could be in the esophagus or the stomach or wherever it happens to be. And so, yeah, like if you've got damage and you're greatly increasing stomach acid, that's going to be uncomfortable to say the least.
Yeah.
If you have a weak mucosal barrier and you're increasing stomach acid, that's also going to be not so comfortable. And I think like the entire mucosal barrier of the stomach is like replaced every 3 days or something. Yep. Basically, you know, your stomach is eating itself. Well, I guess that's a very crude thing to say. I shouldn't have said that.
Well, I mean, your stomach is releasing protease and stomach acid. And I get what you're saying. It is, the lining constantly needs to be, you know, repaired, and shed, and replaced, and stuff like that. And you are definitely correct about that. Mucus production and so forth and so on. But what about?
Well, I mean, just to go back to that, I mean, that's also why like self-diagnosis and self-care can be not necessarily the best also, because you go out and read something on the internet, like I forget which site was popularized that protocol with the synthetic hydrochloric acid capsules. If somebody had like a bleeding ulcer and started doing that, that could be fatal.
Yes, it could be. Or if they had severe H. pylori overgrowth and causing the H. pylori to burrow into the stomach, causing severe inflammation, which if they had an ulcer could cause a perforation through that mechanism too. I mean, it definitely can happen.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like using butyrate. Butyrate lyses H. pylori on contact. That's the reason why if you have a healthy microbiome, you have like bifidobacterium producing butyrate, butyric acid, and Clostridium and so forth and so on producing butyrate. You know, taking a butyrate supplement or supplemental butyrate to try to reduce H. pylori, it can cause similar effects to the BTNHCl in that it's going to lyse a large amount of H. pylori, which is going to dump a lot of endotoxin directly into your stomach lining, which is going to cause a crap ton of inflammation. You know, and that's why zinc carnosine is paramount to any regimen when someone is tackling H. pylori, just to help, you know, control the cytokines of the mucosal barrier, to help with the mucosal lining itself in the stomach. It's very important to control inflammation, you know, and stuff like that. I think zinc carnosine is one of the most important cost-effective upper gut with D-limonene supplements that anybody can use to improve their health.
So there's a lot of different forms of zinc out there, and there's also a lot of different forms of carnitine out there, or carnosine out there, carnitine too. But there's some magic with the chelation of zinc and carnosine together, especially for H. pylori, where, I mean, there's a number of mechanisms that are produced by taking that supplement. But what would be the risks? Would anybody have a risk of taking zinc carnosine? Where would that be counterindicated?
I don't think there would be any counterindications to our knowledge.
What about zinc toxicity? I know there's not a lot of zinc in it.
The zinc carnosine, the systemic absorption from zinc carnosine is next to none. Most of it occurs directly within the stomach because of the formulation of zinc carnosine itself. A lot of people have noticed that when they take zinc carnosine, it rarely influences their zinc serum numbers or even their zinc numbers on like a SpectraCell test. And it seems to be because the magical blend, because zinc itself is rapidly bonded to stomach acid, forms of Lewis acid in the stomach. It's the reason why kids, zinc pennies are fatal, because, you know, it'll cause severe gastritis and perforation from the zinc ions. And zinc carnosine, that slows it down so that it's beneficial and it doesn't enter systemic circulation as much. It affects localized on the stomach and possible the upper part of the duodenum itself. You know, so I really don't think that. Trust me, I've taken zinc carnosine for how many years now, Jason? 5 years on a daily basis, 15 to 30 milligrams, and my zinc levels are normal, and my copper levels are also normal. And I take 30 milligrams a day. So,
yeah, there's some zinc stuff like OptiZinc is recommended by a lot of health sites.
Now that'll increase zinc,
Yeah, it will. In fact, and it can cause gastritis too. I mean,
Correct.
like, check it out. Like, a lot of people who start like a new supplement regimen and they go on this health site and they're like, here are our top 10 recommended supplements, and OptiZinc tends to be
Never
one
take
of
it on
them.
an empty stomach. Never take it on an empty stomach. Zinc
Yeah.
Carnosine, you can.
And then they come out for some coaching and they're like, hey, I'm feeling terrible. And I'm like, and I know that it's zinc, that it's OptiZinc that's
Yeah.
doing it, but you don't just come right out and say it. So you're like, well, why don't you only take half of your supplements the next day and see if those were causing the problem? And so they take half, and if it's not the half with zinc carnosine, then or with the OptiZinc, then they feel fine.
I always take zinc with food. Always take zinc with food. Unless it's zinc carnosine, then you might be able to take it on an empty stomach.
Yeah, you should be able to, but I mean, you don't have to. But yeah, anyway. So we talked about the D-limonene as a possible way to support the upper gut. L-carnosine as a possible way to support the upper gut. We talked about the synthetic stomach acids and stuff as it could be a way to help, but I basically just wanted to talk about, like, I just wanted to point out the environmental change and not really talk about it as a treatment option, because not a lot of people are really using it as a treatment option for H. pylori. But some of the other terpenes, like oil of oregano and peppermint oil and stuff, those are more for like the small intestine stuff.
Or oregano could be for systemic. It's one of
Yeah.
the few systemic antimicrobial agents that we have.
Right. So you point out for like if they have H. pylori overgrowth in the mouth, that a lot of times they'll do a rinse with colloidal silver. Like there's like a colloid solution of silver, and it's toxic to cells, and it kills everything. So why would you recommend that over something like, just regular mouthwash?
It's safer. I'm not going to recommend someone use an alcohol-based mouthwash.
Well, what if it's xylitol base? There's this stuff I use that uses it's like a xylitol based mouthwash, and it has some like essential oil, like quote unquote essential oils, like peppermint oil and stuff in it too. And it doesn't have any alcohol.
I mean, if I was going to do that, I would use a combination of cinnamon and xylitol mouthwash.
Yeah,
because cinnamon actually has the highest. It even puts thymol to shame. Apparently, so cinnamaldehyde has the highest broad spectrum antibacterial properties known to any natural agent through the research that I've seen. It's so strong you can even tackle MAP on its own. Based off of studies and stuff like that. Cinnamon is ridiculous.
It's also, especially depending on the variety of cinnamon, is toxic to us too.
Correct, that is true. Between, you talk about Ceylon and Cassia.
Yeah,
but I would say the xylitol would work to a degree, but I'm afraid that some people who swallow it could cause issues with digestion. Okay, I use a silver mainly as just a localized agent. They swish with it, they spit it out, they wash their mouth out afterwards. Some of it's going to make itself into the gut. It's not really going to be systemically absorbed into the bloodstream, affect the bloodstream microbiome as much. And that's why I use the extra virgin olive oil and the coconut oil, oil pulling as a way of doing it too. Using xylitol and using a cinnamon mouthwash together. Heck, I use a xylitol toothpaste that uses bentonite clay, which would absorb LPS toxins produced by H. pylori in the mouth. And it has a little bit of orange and lemon oil in there, which of course would contain D-limonene as a localized antibacterial and antimicrobial agent too in the mouth. So that could be used as well. I don't like affecting other parts of the microbiome as I possibly can. The older I've gotten, it's like using tetracycline as a broad spectrum antibiotic that affects, gram-negative and gram-positive and influencing the microbiome in a more negative way compared to using like amoxicillin, which might, affect the microbiome less. That's all.
Yeah, I just don't like colloidal silver.
I know you
because
don't. I know you don't.
not that I don't think it's effective for that. I just think that there is so much marketing hype around it that I've just gotten just
Old man bitter about it. I mean, I don't think it's the miracle antimicrobial agent that everyone makes it out to be. I think it has its limitations. I think oil oregano is a much better one, but at the cost of oil oregano being systemic. That's my main issue with using it as a frontline, protocol recommendation. That's all.
Well, we've reached the end of this segment, and we'll probably do a two-parter on this one, and we'll move on to next week. But we're about at the hour mark, so it's a good time to stop. But we're going to start doing these shows regularly now that it's the summertime and we have more time to do these shows. So thanks for tuning in, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day or night or whenever you're watching this.
Take care. Hope y'all take care. Have a good day.